Hello and welcome to the store setup training. Let's go ahead and get started. As you can see, in terms of the basic user interface, we have some items on the left and items up top that repeat. Doesn't matter where you click, you get to the same item. In the middle of our screen, we have all of the credentials that we just logged in with. The hyperlink, click here to change your password, will give you a fresh set of 90 days. So the 90 days password expiration will reset here. Because we're in training, the dates in the right corner here are off, but in production, those dates will be in sync and work correctly. Do keep in mind the actual date runs on a 24-hour clock. The business date runs at a 6 o'clock p.m. cutoff time. So for example, if I made a purchase after 6 o'clock p.m. tonight in a CASHNet store, today would be the actual date, but the business date would be whatever that next business day is. So tomorrow in this example here. Again, a reminder that we are in the training environment. You can see the CASHNet at MSU homepage, so that link will take us to the ecommerce.msu.edu website, which has a wealth of information. The CASHNet user manual is here, and that's a wonderful link as well to get to the user guide. There's lots of help and support in that manual. Today we'll work through Chapter 3 together. You've probably just went through Chapter 2 of the user guide, which talks about access and logging in to this CASHNet homepage. And at the bottom of our screen, you can see yesterday's transaction and activity and today's transaction and amount receipted. In terms of CASHNet as an e-commerce solution, please keep in mind that Eventbrite is an approved e-commerce solution as well. The fees are a little bit higher, but it is a viable option if you're interested. Also, if you don't need any sort of e-commerce component, so you're not collecting any money, Qualtrics might be a good tool to use. That's a surveying tool. So Qualtrics might be a viable option as well. Also, if folks are interested in purchasing an item through CASHNet, whereas you get immediate access into D2L or Desire to Learn, the campus course management system, there is a system called CAPS that will allow you to integrate and have CASHNet talk to D2L to make sure that when folks pay for a course, they get immediate access to their course in D2L. Again, for any of those options, please reach out to the MSU IT Service Desk for help and support. We've just went through the CASHNet homepage. Find transactions, reports, fulfill orders will be in the processors training. We don't do assisted payments here on campus, and store setup is going to be where we will stick to for the rest of class. Training and support isn't going to be helpful at all. Again, please stick to the CASHNet at MSU homepage or our user manual. Store setup is where we'll stick to for the remainder of the store setup training. If you have access to more than one store, you get the option to choose which store you'd like to view. I'll go with the prototype store that you may have viewed in the CASHNet promo video. You'll see check marks on my pane in the left because I have implemented my store. If this is your first time going through your store setup, you won't see any check marks on the left, but we will go through all of these categories to make sure that we go through each item for setting up our store. As you can see here, I can preview a store if I have something already set up. I can start at the beginning or I can continue where I left off. Let's go ahead and click on name and logo. And again, we'll go through all of these settings together on the left pane here. We'll walk through Chapter 3 together to set up our store. It is suggested that you go ahead and follow along in Chapter 3 of the CASHNet user guide. In this screen, you can see that you should have a 4-digit merchant code. And by the way, feel free to open up your actual store and work alongside me here to make sure that you are learning and doing at the same time. So we have a 4-digit merchant code, and you can see here that ours are 5 letters, but this was the very first store ever created. So the code is a little bit different there. You have a merchant name, and then you have a logo that you'll want to have attached to your store. This is a logo or a masthead or a banner that will appear at the top of all of your store pages. And while it says there's a limit there, that limit is actually 500 kilobytes. So please make sure that you have a file smaller than 500 kilobytes, and that can be a GIF file or a JPEG. Again, please make sure that you have a file size smaller than 500 kilobytes. This, if you do have a file larger than that size, it does break the functionality of your store. It won't tell you what the exact issue is, but it does cause a significant issue with your store, and your store just simply won't function. The last question on this screen is to include a store logo on the printable receipt screen. That's a yes or no, and that's entirely up to you. As a good habit, we'll want to make sure that we either save and stay on this screen. We can continue, which will save and continue on to the next topic on the left there. If you want to preview the change that we just made, we would have to implement the store first, click continue on this screen, and then preview our store. I'll go ahead and click continue and remind you to implement at every screen as needed. Keep in mind that implementing is immediate if you want those changes to take place immediately. Otherwise, there is another option called the store scheduler, and that will allow you to set up a specific date and time in order to schedule your store. So again, you can implement a new version at a given time, take your store offline, or bring your store online. This is a great option to use in case you are maybe working on an early bird registration discount. And so I can work on the store right now, but have that show up 6 a.m. on a given day and schedule that out instead of having to be working on it at that time. So keep in mind, as you're making changes every time you log into your store, do I want those immediately? In that case, do I want those to immediately show up? In that case, I would implement store. Otherwise, I can schedule those changes as needed. Let's go ahead and continue on our second option here, titled Store Settings. Do you want to organize the items you are selling into categories? That's up to you. Most folks start without categories. They just start with their items, and then as their store grows, they put those items into categories. Your categories can be, workshops, physical goods, conferences, t-shirts, whatever it may be, or you can divide your categories out by your clientele, like staff, faculty, students, community, and so on. If you have a large number of items, it's good to put them into categories and allow folks to drill down. Otherwise, if your store is starting simple, it's nice to not have categories so that way your customers can see all of the items you're offering. And that's a good marketing strategy as well. Do you want the no preview image as default image for items? We'll say no, I don't like the way that thumbnail looks, to have a little thumbnail that says no preview. I would actually like to upload an image of my items, or even something more professional like a Spartan helmet. Do you want your customers to log in when they make a purchase? We usually like that not to even be available, so that way they don't even see that screen. But if you have customers who will be frequenting your store, then you may want to have that as an option. So every customer has an option to create a unique username and password, or continue as a guest. But again, that's up to your customers and how often they're visiting your store. We can ignore the next two items. They are not applicable, as we see here in section 3.3 in the user guide. In terms of payment options for the customer, we have three actual options. They are the three that are checked: credit card, ACH, electronic check, or purchase order. You must have at least one option in as many as these three. The other two do not work for regular purposes. Purchase order is actually a phrase that can be edited on the transaction screen or on the billing screen. So what happens is, instead of purchase order, you can say swipe on the day of the event, or mail in check. But the point is that you'll have to make sure to reconcile all of those that chose that alternative payment method. Purchase order can also mean that funds will be sent via Koali financial system after the conference, or whatever it may be. Recent payment option just shows a warning if someone is making a purchase within 24 hours using the same account. So it's always nice so that folks avoid duplicate payments. Item description on the catalog. Remember, in the store when you're shopping, you see a hyperlink and then you see a description underneath that. You can show a full description or a partial description, which just shows the first 70 characters and then an ellipsis. And so that way they can click on the hyperlink and get more information on the next screen. This option just depends on how many items you're selling and what kind of screen real estate you want to best communicate. Category description, I won't show anything, or I can just disregard it because I don't use categories in my store, but if I do, I have 3 options there as well. And again, at any time, I can save that, preview it, implement it, and then make a different choice if I need to. Also keep in mind that the default settings are the optimal settings, so if you're unsure by any means, stick to the defaults and that should work out for you. Check if you want the search capability, we'll keep that checked. Can your customers add the same item more than once to a basket? That's going to be up to you. Can your customers edit the item quantities on that basket page? That's up to you as well. These next 2 options are also not applicable, again, per our user guide, so we can disregard those. At the very bottom here, what's the URL to return to when your customers sign out? If it's blank, that goes back to the home page. That works out for me. That makes total sense. Same with that next option. Here we have, do you want to pass information back to the calling system by appending data to the sign out URL? That's a little bit complicated. We'll leave it at the default setting, and on the next few screens, we'll have some good ways of getting data back about our store. What's the URL associated with clicking the store logo? Again, we can disregard that one or enter something if you'd like. What's the timeout value? Again, 15 minutes is good before the system will automatically log you off. That's entirely fine. The home page is going to be our catalog, which is all of our goods, sending folks right to our store. If you click on store entrance, you'll see that you have to enter or upload a JPEG image, and that just gets to be unnecessary. So we'll go ahead and continue. Do you want to receive notification of successful and/or failed transactions via email or HTTPS get or post messages? We'll keep that at yes and click continue. So you can see here at the top we have email notifications. We need at least 2 people who will get email notifications for failed transactions. Keep in mind this can be a departmental email address. And the same goes for successful transactions. Again, it can be a shared inbox that multiple folks have access to, or it can be at least, again, 2 individuals. As folks get sick and go on vacation, it's important that at least one person always has a pulse as to what's going on in your store, whether it's successful transactions or transactions that are failing and need attention. At the bottom, we do have HTTP notifications. That is a little bit more complicated. If you do want an updated departmental database, you can get that option turned on by working with our MSU IT service desk, and they'll be more than happy to work with you through getting those notifications if you're interested, but that is optional. Go ahead and click continue. The theme is section 3.5 in our user guide. While we have a few options for the theme, we do want to stick to the default layout 2 and keep it at that because we did check this theme entirely for accessibility and usability standards. We have the official MSU green in there, so we definitely want to go ahead and keep this and not worry about customizing any of the colors or fonts. So I'll uncheck that box so that way I can skip that screen when I click continue. If credit card is selected as a payment option, would you like to do AVS and CID checking? We definitely would. That is a good safety and security feature. We'll talk about those shortly. AVS stands for Address Verification System. That just means that the address that was entered should match the address that's on file for that credit card. CID checking stands for Card Identification Number, and that just means that the 3 or 4 digit number on the back of the credit card matches what was entered. Let's go ahead and click continue. Fortunately, this page can only be changed by the system administrator, so I can't make any changes. In Train here, everything goes, so all of the credit card numbers. So we do have a fake credit card number that we use for training purposes. You'll find that information in the manual, and you can use that to make your transactions in the Train environment. In production, you must use an actual credit card number. You can always do a refund immediately. In production, it will have different check boxes, and the top of this page will let you know which boxes should be checked. And it's nice because even international credit cards work, bad credit card numbers don't work, and that has been locked down at the administrator level, again, to keep us safe and secure. Let's click continue. Would you like to display custom messages? And that is a yes, and that is section 3.8 in our user guide. We'll go ahead and click continue. So as you can see here, if we click the drop down, there are several different types of messages that we can edit. And these little headers over here tell us about where these messages appear. So we have messages that appear on the confirmation page, in our catalog page, which is our main page where we browse all of our items, and then the receipts page, and so on. While there are several custom messages, there are only 4 that are required to be updated. One of which we can take a look at together. That is the receipt first section. If you made a purchase in a CASHNet store and walk through that experience, this is the receipt text that appears in the upper left-hand corner of your receipt, letting you know where this item came from. So we have you update this information with your store name, your store address, phone number, email address, website. The more ways we can get folks to get in touch with our stores and be more specific, the better their customer experience will be. You can enter a map here, you can enter links, upload images, you can code in HTML if you would like. There are several options for updating and customizing these messages. Please check out the user guide for the other 3 messages that must be updated as well. The 3 other custom messages that must be updated are the receipt email header, the page title, and the page trailer. So those are 4 custom messages that must be updated before your store goes live. Please refer to section 8, appendix A, for more information about these custom messages and where they appear. We'll go ahead and click continue. So as you may have noticed, we skipped categories because we didn't want categories, so the system skipped it entirely. And we've gone through about half of the items that we need to get to for our store settings. All of the things that we've just looked at are things that we do just once, and we don't need to do them all of the time. You set your custom messages, you set your security and your store settings once, and then you don't have to worry about them unless something changes. That's the bones of the store, and now we take a look at the meat of the store, the actual item codes. Here we set up our items as well as edit them as needed. As you can see here, I have all of the items I have ever created. Unfortunately, in CASHNet, you cannot delete an item. You can only disable an item. So please think carefully before you create an item. Again, we're working in the train environment, so we create our items and then we'll do a one-time copy into production once we're all set. So even in training, we don't want to create items that have test in the name or we know we aren't going to be keeping in production. In order to play around with different items or look at different setups, that's what the prototype store is for, as well as the conference store, to allow you to see the different possibilities you can have within setting up potential items. Also keep in mind for our categories, you can create categories before or after your item, so you can turn on categories at any time or turn them off. One item though cannot be in 2 categories. What happens is that when you have categories, there's a drop down menu, and so every item can go in a given category. You can have an item that just free floats and doesn't belong in a specific category, but one item cannot be in 2 categories at the same time. Beyond categories, you can build out subcategories, again, if you have a large inventory of items or large amount of items. Also, when you communicate to your clients, you can create a deep link that goes down to that category or the item level. So if you're a store that has 100 items and you want to send folks to a specific holiday event, for example, you can send them right down specifically to that category or item level without overwhelming your customers with the catalog page or home page of your store. You'll notice that we do have some inventorying going on here. We do have the option to inventory if we would like, or not inventory at all. We can turn on inventory anywhere throughout our process, but you'll see that in just a bit, whereas we decide to inventory some items and not inventory others because it's just not necessary. Keep in mind that when you inventory an item, it will count down and will not let anyone purchase an item that is at a 0 inventory. CASHNet will not notify you that your item is at a 0 inventory. You will just have to create a custom message that instead of saying out of stock says call this number or email here or check back with us next year or that we're sold out, but the system will not notify you of that occurrence. Also keep in mind that when you do a refund for items that have inventory on them, items that are tracking inventory, the refunded amount does not affect the inventory. So if I am tracking inventory on this annual conference and I had 2 refunds, the number doesn't go back up unless I do it manually. I can add a new item altogether, or I can edit a given item. I'll go ahead and edit our annual conference registration item. Notice that edit allows me to change the available inventory, whereas select allows me to edit the item. Please refer to the store setup outline on page 4 of the store setup handout. This outline will allow you to better outline your items, which item goes to which account number, the amount it's going to be sold for, which questions do we need to ask along with that item, and so on. Planning your store on paper is going to be a lot easier than doing so in the system. Again, keep in mind that the item code, once it's created, it cannot be deleted. And so that first field is not editable. Every other field, though, underneath this item code is editable. But once we create our item code, we can no longer change it or delete it. We can only disable it. So it is really important to think it through and outline everything on paper and make sure that that's a viable option before you actually build out your store online. The MSU IT Service Desk is available to consult on your store outline if you would like to get it reviewed to make sure that your store is being set up for the objectives and business processes that you have in mind. The item code has a maximum of 12 characters, so you have the first 4 already taken by your merchant code. So every item in your store begins with that same 4-digit merchant code. There's a dash, and then you have a remaining 7 characters to come up with something that's descriptive but not specific. So again, we're looking for something that's sustainable but not too specific. So for example, I wouldn't want to call it CONF 19 representing that year because I can actually reuse that item code every year. Again, the description is where I can enter 2019 or whatever year it may be and change the title. That's the hyperlink that folks click on, but the item code is what we see in the back end. And thinking about sustainability is where we want to go in terms of our item codes and the reports that we run, and not ending up with several item codes after several years of using CASHNet, whereas I could have just kept the number of codes simple and reuse those item codes, just changing out the dates every time I run those reports for subsequent years. The long description is underneath the hyperlink on your Browse Catalog page or your main store homepage, and so that's where you get either a full description or the first 70 characters and then an ellipsis, and then an ellipsis if desired. Receipt text is text that only shows up on the receipt. This is a great example to put thank yous or reminders for folks who have purchased that item. Sequence is whereas you would put a number in that field to have that item show up in that order. Otherwise, the default in CASHNet is that it looks at the item code and alphabetizes your items on your display homepage there according to that item code. While we have 6 fields for account number, the first 2 are the only required, the remaining 4 are optional. Again, keep in mind that in CASHNet, you can have several different items in a store that go to several different account numbers, while the store itself has one account number that the fees go to. Unfortunately, we can't split funds on either of those revenue or fee accounts. You'll have to split those after your event takes place or on an annual basis. Next question is if the customer can add this item from the catalog page. That's up to you. That's a yes or no. Collecting shipping information, that's going to be a yes or no. Do keep in mind that you'll only want to collect shipping information if you are actually shipping something. Fulfillment is a sort of reconciling, whereas you want to fulfill an item before you go ahead and charge the customer. So that requires an extra level of support, whereas your CASHNet administrators, upon notification of this specific item has been sold, they would have to log into the system and either process this transaction or void it out. That requires an extra level of support, and many folks have found that they don't need to require fulfillment. The easiest option is to have every transaction automatically close and not require fulfillment and not check this box for fulfillment, and then a refund is needed, you can always issue a refund quickly and easily. Sales tax can get complicated to calculate, so we advise that you just build in the cost of tax into your item as needed. It gets difficult when you are shipping to California, but you have a Florida credit card, so it's just advised to add that cost into your item cost as needed. Featured items and new items just display the item up top on your store homepage. That's up to you. In terms of image, you can upload a JPEG or GIF file there representing your image. If you don't have an actual image, something like a Spartan helmet is professional and looks nice as well. Enter the price for your item here. Keep in mind that we are able to take donations, sponsorships, and gifts from our customers. In that event, though, we would want to contact the Finance and Endowment Office. They are responsible for getting this sort of information to the donors. Come tax time, they are the ones that issue those receipts, and so they need to be aware of that information. The Finance and Endowment Office will just request name, address, amount, allocation codes from you and be able to have that information for the university. Can your customers change the price? Yes or no? That's up to you. Can they specify the quantity? That's a no, yes, or lookup values. Lookup by quantity value means that one item costs $5, but two items cost $9. So CASHNet can do traditional math, but if you'll be doing a different formula, if you'll be using a different formula, you need to notify CASHNet of your quantity values. Lookup by quantity range is where maybe 1 to 5 items costs $1,000, but 6 to 10 items cost $10,000. So again, if you're not using traditional math, then CASHNet just needs you to upload that information and they can do that for you. You'll want to enter the minimum allowable quantity and maximum allowable quantity, and then the singular and plural name for this item. Because I said that my customers are not specifying the quantities, these fields are grayed out. So if I said yes, then I can enter some text in those fields. Inventory, again, the option is to inventory or not inventory, and again, that's just going to depend on you and your item. Keep in mind, you can turn that on at any time. If you choose to inventory, you need to enter an amount, otherwise that field will be grayed out. Do you want to collect additional information when this item is purchased? If you're selling a conference ticket, then you might have additional questions like what would you like to eat, which sessions will you be attending, and so on. If you're selling something and you have no additional questions, then you don't want to check that box. Besides the 7 fields that are required with every transaction, we usually have some additional fields where we need to gather information. Again, keep in mind the 7 required fields with every single transaction are name, city, state, address, country, zip, and email. So anything outside of that, for that customer, if you'd like to gather, you'll need to collect that additional information. Also keep in mind that when we talk about name in those 7 fields, we're talking about billing name. So sometimes it could be an administrative assistant, for example, purchasing a conference registration for someone else, and the administrative assistant is not actually attending the conference. So billing name might be different than attendee name. Would you like to select add-ons for this item? So for example, maybe you're selling tickets to a golf outing and then you're also selling an additional golf hat for $10 or whatever it may be. That can be an add-on. Then keep in mind, for that add-on, can anybody buy it, or can you only buy that add-on if you buy that main item? Keep in mind, for add-ons, you can also make those a set price or allow your customers to change the price. So because we said that we wanted to create additional questions with our item, we needed to create additional fields with our item, we get into the reference types. So again, as you've outlined your item setup, you'll see that underneath each item code, you see the reference types. Again, those additional fields, whereas we need to gather some information from our customers. With this conference registration, we ask about which souvenir they would like. So I'll show you what that item looks like, and we can click Edit, Selected Reference Type. Here we have an item referred to as a souvenir. We have 6 different options here that we can go with, and the What's This link is actually helpful here to show us what that looks like. So when you have additional questions, you can collect them in a text entry box, in checkboxes, radio buttons, drop-down menus, and then something called explanatory text, where you just have a body of text. These ref codes are nice because you can create them once in your store and reuse them along with multiple items or any item in your store. You can mix and match these item codes as well, so you can have a checkbox along with explanatory text that says that you understand these terms. We can go ahead and close out of this box. So for our prompt, we just asked which souvenir would you like, and we made that horizontal radio buttons. Update item amount is when the price changes depending on the choice that you make. Is this reference type required? Yes or no? Usually they are, but something like, please let us know if any dietary or physical accommodations need to be made, that could be optional. Remember value, we can go ahead and ignore. Show on receipt, that's going to be up to you. And then these next 2 fields we ignore as well. And again, that's detailed in section 3.10.3 in our user guide. In terms of detail sort order, we can have these items show up how we put them into the system, by the value column, description column, or the price column. Keep in mind, value and description, the differences are value is the column that's going to show up on my report. So when I run my report and I need to prepare for this conference, I'll look at the value column, and it'll be short and not a wide column to take up a lot of room on my report. The description column is what my customer sees, and they would like maybe a lengthier, fancier description, and I don't need all of that in my report. So that's the difference between the value column and the description column. Again, value is what's going to show up on your report when you run it from CASHNet, whereas description is what the customer sees when they're making this purchase. You can also select a default from the drop-down to choose a given souvenir default, or you can leave that blank. And then we can go ahead and click Save. I did want to show you another good option as well. For example, a popular one, and again, I can see all of the ref types that are available in my store. Proto attendee is a good option. I'll select it and toggle it over. Again, keep in mind I can rearrange these questions. I can add a blank line in between them, a solid line in between them, to kind of clean up all of the different questions that I might be asking along with my purchase. I'll select attendee name and edit this ref type. You can see here the description is just an attendee name. This was a text field that we needed. The prompt is name of attendee, or please enter your name. The price is not going to change. depending on what you put in this field. It is required. I want it on the receipt. I didn't even enter a minimum or maximum field size. You can definitely do that. That just kind of helps to cut down on garbage data that folks might be entering, though that usually doesn't happen. The data type here is letters, but it can be numbers or a date, so the system can help you capture the data that you're looking for. And again, we can disregard those last two options and click Save. We'll go ahead and continue on to our next screen. Again, we go back out to the item code screen, whereas we can see all of our different items. If I'm good here, I can go on to select items, which is my next screen. The items in the right column are all selected and turned on right now in my store. The items in the left are turned off. And so what happens is when the conference is done, I will log in. I'll jump right down to the select items section. I'll select the annual conference, toggle it over to the left, and then save and implement to make sure that my item is no longer being sold. I would definitely preview that as well to ensure that I have disabled that given item. We'll go ahead and continue on to the next screen, which is a store outline. Here you can see categories first if you chose categories, and then the item code and the item description next. Unfortunately, it does not go down to the ref type or reference type level, but that would be the next level in this hierarchy of how our items are set up in our store. We'll click Continue. And again, if we want to implement and make these changes immediately, we'll click Continue. Otherwise, we can visit the store scheduler and pick a specific date and time we'd like to schedule the changes that we just made. In terms of forms, please refer to Chapter 1 of the CASHNet User Guide to take a look at the merchant request form, which is section 1.8. That needs to be filled out first. Please refer to the Getting Started video if you need to learn more about forms and access and getting started with your store. Thank you.